Good morning, everyone. With the release for 5.0, we had some great improvements for our temporary closures on SR and VPK. And so Jennifer and I will be walking through that. I'll be walking through the school readiness process, and then I'll hand it over to Jennifer for the VPK process. And then at the end, we'll let you know about some guidance materials that we have available. For providers that need to create temporary closures, we just want to make sure that they understand that they create the temporary closure using that online reporting form, and they submit those closures as soon as possible. And they need to be processed. The closure has to be processed by the coalition for those closure days to show correctly on the attendance roster. You can't submit a temporary closure if you've already submitted your attendance. So you have to make sure you do your temporary closure first before that attendance is submitted. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hop in. We are using our alpha test environment, so all the data, child's names are scrambled. So I'm gonna log in as a provider. I'm gonna go to attendance, temporary closures. Then I'm gonna click add closure. If at any point during the demo you have any questions, please put that in the questions box, and we will, Sarah or Jennifer, if y'all and any of the BAs can kind of keep an eye on that and just bring it up, the questions as they come in. The whole site closure is staying the same. There are no changes right now to that process. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in to do a temporary closure for SR, a partial closure. And then when I select my provider, it's only those providers that have certified contracts that will display in that drop down, and it's the providers or the sites that the user who is logged in has access to. So I'll go ahead and click my days. I'll say I had a closure for this provider for our test environment. They haven't submitted their August attendance yet. So I'll select a closure from August the 23rd through the 25th. And I will say that our anticipated reopen date is going to be on the 26th. Anywhere you see the little eye icon, if you just hover over, it gives you additional information about that specific field, if you have any questions on that. The new part of temporary closures is that with now the partial closures, you can select the care level for SR. So if only the 2-year-old class care level was impacted, then you could just select the care level, the 2-year-olds. If it was all SR, you can select all of those. The other thing is, if you have your 2-year-olds and you'll say one of those days was CR, closure reimbursable, and maybe another day was closure non-reimbursable, you just click on that CR, or you can just re-click it to move it back to the reimbursable. But then on any other care levels, you can make changes, and it doesn't have to be the same for all care levels. All right, so I'm just going to say we're going to do this for 2- and 3-year-olds today. So our 3-year-olds are all closure non-reimbursable. Our 2-year-olds are all closure reimbursable. For our closure reasons, we have COVID things, if there was an exposure, if there's deep cleaning, if you have a declared state of emergency, like a hurricane or something else where there's an official that declared that state of emergency. It's important to select the most correct reasons. You can select more than one, so you could say we had exposure, and so the child attendance was down and there was not as many staff available. So you can select multiple to accurately portray what's going on. If you select other, please put in a very detailed comment. Other just means none of the other items above seem to apply. And then we are going to submit this to our coalition. If your provider is has contracts with multiple coalitions, each of the coalitions get a copy of that temporary closure form to approve for that specific attendance roster. I'm gonna cancel this and look back here at the care levels. We had a really good question about what if you have multiple classrooms for the same care level? Can you choose by child? Yes. So right now for the provider, they're just gonna select, hey, all of my 2-year-olds, that care level, we have to say, yes, we close that. After it's approved, then after the temporary closure is approved by the coalition, then the provider can go back and say, okay, this child in this other classroom was not impacted, and you can change it to the child actually attended, or if there's a different absence reason, you can update that on the roster. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and submit that. That's right. All right, so we have added our closure. For some SR, we have our closure ID, the dates, and this one just went to ELCF Polk. So now I'm going to log in as the coalition and review that temporary closure form. So I'll go to provider, temporary closures, and submitted. All right, so the first one is the one we just created for our provider. So we'll click the edit button. If I did want to mention that if a provider starts a temporary closure form and they have questions, the form is incomplete, they can still contact the coalition, and the coalition can still go in and view that and help them answer any questions that they have through the coalition portal. All right, so on the edit temporary closure screen, you as the coalition have access to make changes to any of it. So if you're like, okay, they said it was the 23rd through the 25th, but it was actually the 24th, they were back on the 25th, you can make those updates as the coalition. All right, so since we made that update, it reset our care levels. So I'm going to cancel out of here and reopen it. So it pulls over that information that the provider originally submitted. All right, I'm going to leave the dates the same. So we see that our 2-year-olds are both all closure reimbursable, CR days. Our preschool class, the 3-year-olds, are non-reimbursable. As the coalition, you can go in and change that. You say, nope, they mark those incorrectly. We need to adjust those. Those are actually all closure reimbursable for the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds. If you need to update any closure reasons, you can add documentation or a comment, and you can approve it. So I will go ahead and approve this closure. So now the status has changed from submitted or coalition reviewing to processed, because we have approved that closure. So I'm going to, let me look at the questions box before I go much further. The comment box is going to be a required field if you select other as a closure reason. All right, so now I'm back on the provider portal. I'm going to go to my attendance. This is SR again, attendance, manage SR attendance. We're just looking at our August roster. Since they had not submitted it, they could submit a temporary closure. So here is a 3-year-old. Okay. This provider actually had a temporary closure already submitted for the 16th through the 19th, but the one we just created was the 23rd through the 24th. It is closure reimbursable, which is what the provider put in and what the coalition approved. However, we'll just give the example that this child actually did attend because their classroom was not impacted. You click on that CR day. I'm trying to move this up. I know it got really small. So you can either change the absence reason to make it not closure reimbursable or linked to that temporary closure, or you can completely remove the absence, meaning that the child actually attended that day. So for this example, we'll say, yes, our child attended that day. And now you see that, yes, they're showing as full-time for that day as attended. And each child that actually attended and was not part of that temporary closure, you can, the provider can make those changes. All right, any questions related to the attendance roster or temporary closures for SR? So let me look at, see if I can find a 2-year-old. I don't see a 2-year-old. And there was only one 3-year-old. Okay. So the provider will just go through, review that, and then submit attendance as usual. All right, I'm going to go ahead and submit this to the coalition for my attendance. And then I'm going to look over in have attendance in the coalition portal. SR. All right, here is our the First Academy preschool for August. We're going to review that roster and have attendance. All right, so they had a closure of closure reimbursable days for the 16th through the 19th. You see that on have attendance. And then we have the 1 3-year-old that was impacted by the closure for the 24th and the 25th. Remember, the closure was the 23rd through the 25th, but we changed it, the provider changed it to know that child attended that day. And then it will just continue to move through the process of attendance, approving that and then walking through it. I did want to note, let me go ahead and approve all these, and then I'll show you on closed attendance that there's an indicator at the top of closed attendance that shows you if a temporary closure was included for that roster. And all the children's names that are listed here are scrambled data, so we're not seeing real child names on this. So we're approving it from have attendance, then we'll move on to close attendance. All right, I'm going to move to close attendance and go to SR and review this. All right, so we have our PR3 child here showing that they attended the 21 days. So it is counting those closure days as closure reimbursable. They are being paid for all of those. I did want to show you this has closures. Yes, this indicator here in the header lets you know at a glance if this roster has any closures. So if a provider didn't have any, it would show no. In this case, it does show yes. All right, so I do see a question. Sarah, do we have anyone from policy on this morning?
I think so, but we will, oh, there you go. There's Marty. Therefore, I don't know if everybody can see this question, so I'll just read it out loud, but how many days can a child be paid for with the CR code? Is it still up to 10 days. System-wide, there is no max, so it's up to the coalitions.
For SR.
For SR, yes, that's specific to SR.
Oh yes, sorry, that is very important, SR.
All right. Any other questions on SR temporary closures? All right, I'm not seeing any right now. So Jennifer, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you for your demo for VPK.
Okay, so for VPK, I'm going to demonstrate a partial site closure where a provider has multiple classes and only one or some of the provider's classes has a temporary closure. But first, for this provider, I want to show you the provider's VPK provider application before we process the closure. I'll just edit the provider's VPK provider application. And again, I'm also in the alpha test environment and the data here is scrambled. Okay, so first, you're going to notice that this particular provider only has one class calendar for the school year. And the provider has two classrooms. They have AS21 for the school year and BF21. And so obviously the two classes share that one calendar, the same calendar. And in this demo, I'm going to create a temporary closure for one of the classes. And later you'll see, and it's a temporary closure that has non-reimbursable days. So later you'll see how the system will automatically separate that calendar and assign the revised copied calendar to one of the classes so that each of them will have their own. Okay, so to create a temporary closure for VPK or SR, provider would click on attendance, temporary closures. Okay, and on the landing page, we'll click add closure. And the same VPK form that you saw earlier appears. Going to select the site was partially closed. Services were not provided to all or some VPK classes. Then I'll select the provider who I have access to. It has a VPK contract and enrollment, and attendance had not yet been submitted for the days that I intend to mark as temporary closures. Okay, so let's go back to August, because again, attendance hasn't been submitted yet. Let's say we're closed from the 13th through the 20th and reopen on August 23rd. Okay, and so with this 5.0 release, also for VPK, there's a new section for classes and reimbursement requests. And here you can see the provider's classroom. And notice on the calendar, the days are shaded for the closure date range. Okay, so for this example, I'm going to request temporary closures for class BF21. And when I click on a class and select it, the provider is asked, do you plan to make up any of the missed instructional hours? If the provider selects yes, then the end days will write to the calendar because the providers will update their VPK calendar and make up those days. If the provider selects no, then CR days will be written. Those are closure reimbursable days. So here I'm going to select no. I don't plan to make up those days because I expect to be paid for those emergency closures at the beginning of the school year. If I look at the bottom of the calendar, total process CR days in the class are 0. I haven't had any temporary closures yet. And this number represents process closure. So it's not counting the current closure that we're requesting now, just only process closures. And as you know, for VPK, providers are allowed up to 5 paid emergency closures per year per class. And so if the provider is aware of that rule, they can go in and change any of these days from CR to CN and vice versa, just by clicking on them. Okay. And so from this example, I'm just going to leave the 6 paid closure days so that we can see on the provider side how the provider can review this and edit as needed before they approve the closure. Say the provider overlooked that 5-day limit, select their closure reasons. If you click on Other, a description is required. You can also elaborate in the comments. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and submit the closure. Let me hop into questions really quick before I do that. Okay, and we have a comment to please share with the group how a VPK provider gets paid when a VPK temporary closure goes through the end of the month. If a VPK closure goes through the end of the month, say my days were here, went through to the 31st, the rule states that temporary emergency closures can be paid if the child attends at least 1 day after the closure. Okay, and of course I'm paraphrasing that. So with EFS mod, however, when closures go to the end of the month and you can't, and you're processing the attendance, at that time, EFS mod will not know if the child has returned to the program yet. Even if the child returns on the first day of the next month, when you're processing August, for example, the system doesn't know that yet because the following month has not been submitted yet. So closures that go all the way to the end of the month will not be paid, will not show as being paid in attendance. If you know that the child has already returned, you can do a current period adjustment to pay for those days if the 5 days hasn't been exceeded yet, or if later, maybe the child returns, later in the following month, or even sometime after that, months later. Those closure days that went to the end of the month may still be payable, if the 5 days wasn't exceeded. So in that case, you would have to do a prior period adjustment to pay for those closure days. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and submit this closure to the coalition. And submit. And now the closure record is in submitted status. All right, so as the coalition, I'm going to retrieve that temporary closure from the provider menu, temporary closures, submitted menu. And here's the submitted record. Click on Edit. And the closure form appears just as the provider submitted it. And you notice, just like with SR, all the fields are editable. So if I'm reviewing this closure, and I notice that there are no processed CR days yet, but this closure request has 6 CR days. We're only allowed 5. As a coalition, I can edit this form. I'm going to change the last day to a non-reimbursable day. And notice I did not, as a provider, enter comments. And so when I submitted the closure, the system automatically added a note, closure added by provider user. Okay, so I've edited this closure form to add a CN day, and I'm going to approve the closure.
Hey, Jennifer, I just wanted to point out for once the it's processed, a closure is processed for VPK and SR, then no edits can be made, but you can remove it in the attendance, but like you can't make any, you can't update a processed temporary closure.
Right, thank you, Casey. So I hit view on the processed closure, and now it's read-only. Thank you for adding that. Okay, so this process temporary closure for VPK had a closure non-reimbursable day. So whenever there is a non-reimbursable day involved, after the temporary closure is processed, the system will send an automated email to the provider letting them know that their application is now an incomplete, or not, the wording is non-certified status due to a temporary closure. And the email instructs the provider to log into their account and access their VPK app and make any updates to restore those reduced hours due to the temporary closure. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the provider portal. Access my VPK provider application. And you can notice that the VPK app is now in incomplete status. Click Edit. Okay, so at the beginning of the demo, before the process closure, we only had one calendar. And now that we have a process non-reimbursable day, this calendar was separated. Okay, so here's the original calendar, and the revised clone calendar is also calendar A, and it takes on the same calendar name as the original, and it's appended with the classroom that the calendar has been assigned to. Okay. We are going to add an enhancement to further distinguish this revised calendar from the original, and notate that this is a revised calendar, so the provider can really distinguish between the original and the cloned one. Okay, so the cloned revised calendar was assigned to the F21. This is the class that had the closure. And you can see that the non-reimbursable closure was written to the VPK calendar as non-instructional temporary closure day. And the class hours were reduced by that non-instructional day. Okay, so the provider has to go in and make up for those hours. So they would edit the calendar, and they can restore the hours in different ways. They can maybe remove an existing non-instructional day in the future and decide to be open that day, or they can extend the calendar end date, or they can also add instructional day exceptions where the hours may vary from the normal schedule. So we'll just remove one of these existing future non-instructional days, make it for the hours. Oh, that was a longer one. Okay, I think I accidentally deleted all of those days. So here, I'll just do one. One day. Okay, there you are. And the 540 hours are restored. I'll save my changes. And if any other calendars had non-instructional days due to temporary closures and the hours were reduced, you would also revise that calendar to restore the hours. Okay, so now that my changes are complete, you can see that on the Classrooms tab, the class was assigned the calendar as a temporary closure date in view as well. Now I'm ready to submit the VPK app to the provider, or to the coalition rather. Okay, And now as a coalition, you need to go in, review the VBK app changes, and set it back to certified. So as a coalition, we're going to go to VBK applications, submitted, locate VBK app that was submitted, and review my changes. I know that I had just updated the VBK calendar, so I can go straight there. I have 540 hours on this calendar. I'll go ahead and verify it. There's the 2 different calendars. And my new class has the new calendar. Go ahead and change the status to certified. And save. I'm going to take a pause and go into questions. And yes, thank you, Lee, for your comment. As far as, or Brandy rather, VBK providers no longer need to enter exception date events for reimbursable closures that do not require makeup time. Yes, that's correct. Since paid closures don't reduce class hours, instructional day exceptions will not be written to the VBK calendar. And Lee, your question, so in order for the VBK provider to be paid for the 5 allowed days, would they have to provide further documentation other than just completing the online steps? I'm not aware of any, as far as, was there anyone on policy who could confirm that? Whether any documentation is required for the 5 allowed paid closures? We can get back to you on that. And is there functionality that notifies the provider once the maximum closure days have been reached? Will the system notify them that the max closures were reached and days exceeding the 5 days need to be restored? I don't believe we have that functionality at this time.
Hey, Jennifer, what we do have though is on the temporary closure form under the calendar, it shows the number of CR days for that program year.
Correct, and I'll show you how the form is changed. To show now, this provider has 5 processed temporary closures. So we do have this if they were to go in and create another temporary closure. The total process closure reimbursable days will show 5. However, I don't think they're notified to, that they've exceeded the 5-day limit and to go in and update or to make up the rest of the closure dates that exceed 5. However, the email notification that they'll get when there is a non-reimbursable closure involved will tell them to go into their account and update their calendar.
And Jennifer, before you close out,
Oh, yep. That's okay.
Whenever thank you. When you see that calendar, it's specific to that care level or that class name. So class BF has 5 days, but if you click on AF, you see that they have 0 days that are processed for closure reimbursable. So that is just based on the class or the care level.
All right, thank you, Casey. And yeah, Christine, if your question, if they have another closure the next month, will that 5 carry over to show they've already been used? Yes, so when they pull up a new closure form, again, this will be populated with a 5. And if you click on the other classes, you can see the process closure for that particular class. All right, so at this point, we have a process temporary closure. The provider has updated their VPK provider application to restore any non-reimbursable days, and the coalition has set that VPK app to certified. So now the provider can go into attendance. Attendance, manage VPK attendance. The August roster for class AF21. This class did not have any temporary closures in August, but BF21 did. You can see in the blue header, the temporary closure day is listed in the summary section. If I click on a child, the provider can see the closure days in their attendance calendar. For VPK, you cannot edit any of those days in attendance. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this roster. And attendance has been submitted. All right, as the coalition, we'll go into have attendance for VPK. There's the submitted roster. I'll click on review. And in the VPK have attendance, you'll see the closure days, CRCN. And also, as with SR, in closed attendance, so if I just continue, and also there's a column for closure reimbursable days. There are 5, and because one of the days was closure non-reimbursable. Go ahead and click continue. There's my roster. Click on review. And Casey pointed out earlier, the has closures indicator for SR, VPK has it as well. And yes, there were some temporary closures in this roster. And closed attendance will reflect the payment with those paid temporary closures, and you can reject or verify attendance as usual. Okay, just looking at questions. Okay, and looks like these are being answered. Maybe a report to show who has an end of the month closure for the staff to review a PPA is needed. Thanks, Deborah, for that suggestion.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Casey and Jennifer. You did a great job with the demo. All right, you should be good now, Casey. Okay, perfect. All right, so I can go through this. Next slide. There we go. Okay, so under our coalition zone, the project documents, guidance and training, user guides, our user guides for both the provider portal and the coalition portal have been updated to reflect these new functionality for temp closures. On the guidance and training in the folder as well, there's a separate folder for temporary closures. We have quick tips for SR and VPK on there. We'll have this recording of the webinar posted there. Also, and the PowerPoint as well. I'll post that there because included in this, as you can see, it's kind of a hyperlink. We have YouTube videos, short how-to ones for specific topics on these training videos. A shout out to Casey for working hard on making these. She did a fantastic job, so be sure to check them out. After you look through these, if you still have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We know this is new functionality. We hope that it's helpful and useful to you guys, and we're here to support you in all that you do.